Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, soldier.
Looks great. Thanks again.
August 1944. Camp Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Major Heinrich Muller stood in a vast field of golden wheat, the summer sun beating down on his uniform, which still bore the faint stains of North African sand. He watched something that defied everything he had been taught about warfare, economics, and his fatherland's unyielding path to victory. A machine, massive, rumbling like distant thunder, belching black smoke from its exhaust, rolled inexorably through the wheat field. One pass. That's all it took. In a single, efficient sweep, the wheat was cut down, threshed, separated from the chaff, cleaned and bagged, ready for transport. Dozens of acres harvested in a single day. Work that would demand hundreds of German farmers toiling for weeks under the harsh directives of the Reich's Agricultural Ministry was accomplished here by one machine and one lone operator, casually steering from his seat. Müller had been a career officer in the Wehrmacht, the proud German army. He'd fought in the lightning-fast blitzkrieg through France in 1940, endured the brutal winters on the Eastern Front against the Soviets, and finally been captured in the deserts of North Africa during the collapse of Axis forces in Tunisia. He'd expected execution, or at best grueling slave labor in some remote American prison camp, as Nazi propaganda had warned about the barbaric Yankees. Instead, he found himself in the heartland of Nebraska, a place of endless flatlands and bountiful crops, watching American farmers harvest wheat with machines that he had vaguely heard about in intelligence briefings, but dismissed as exaggerated Allied boasts or mere prototypes. The other German POWs gathered around him, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. One young sergeant whispered hoarsely, "Is this a military vehicle? Some new kind of panzer they've adapted for farming? It moves like our Tigers, but without the guns." Another, an older corporal from a rural Bavarian background, shook his head in denial. "This must be a staged demonstration. They're showing us their experimental equipment to break our spirits. This cannot be standard issue for ordinary civilians." Müller said nothing at first. His mind, trained in logistics and strategy at the Kriegsakademie, was racing through calculations, terrible, inevitable calculations that spelled doom for the Third Reich. If American farmers truly possessed machines like this, if this was not some rare military secret but standard agricultural equipment, then Germany had already lost the war. Not on the battlefields of Normandy or the steppes of Russia, not due to tactical errors or lack of Aryan will, but because of sheer productive capacity. The numbers didn't lie. One machine performing the labor of hundreds of men. That single undeniable fact laid bare the yawning industrial and economic chasm between the resource-strapped Germany and the seemingly limitless United States. Müller glanced at his fellow prisoners, men who had marched under the swastika with unwavering faith. He saw the same grim realization dawning on their faces, etching lines of doubt where once there was only determination. They'd been indoctrinated that America was weak, decadent, a mongrel nation of immigrants unprepared for total war. They'd been assured that German efficiency, technological prowess, and unbreakable spirit would overcome any material advantages the enemy might possess. Now, they stood in a Nebraska wheat field, the wind rustling through the remaining stalks, watching one American farmer on one machine accomplish more in a single afternoon than an entire German village, mobilized under the Reich's labor conscription, could manage in a month. The combine harvester wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It didn't fire shells or drop bombs. But to the German POWs who witnessed it in action, it was the most terrifying demonstration of American power they could imagine. It wasn't just machinery. It was a symbol of an unstoppable industrial juggernaut that could sustain a war effort indefinitely. This is the story of how American agriculture shocked German prisoners of war during World War II, how machines designed to feed civilians inadvertently became psychological weapons in the eyes of the enemy, and how a simple combine harvester in the plains of Nebraska shattered German illusions about their chances of winning the global conflict that had engulfed the world. The German perspective: small farms, labor shortages, and wartime strain. To fully grasp why a combine harvester could terrify battle-hardened German POWs, one must first understand the state of German agriculture in the 1940s, a system strained by ideology, war, and resource limitations. Germany's agricultural system was rooted in traditional small-scale farming, with a diverse mix of crops including wheat, rye, potatoes, and sugar beets, alongside livestock rearing. The landscape was dotted with family-owned plots, often passed down through generations, emphasizing self-sufficiency under the Nazi regime's blood and soil ideology, which romanticized rural life and agrarian purity. The process: fields were typically plowed using horses or oxen, though some areas had adopted small tractors by the late 1930s. Planting was done by hand or with basic seed drills. Harvesting involved teams of workers wielding sickles, scythes, or reapers for cutting, followed by manual bundling into sheaves. Threshing was performed using flails, simple pedal-powered machines, or animal-trodden floors on smaller farms. Winnowing separated grain from chaff by hand or wind, and drying required spreading crops in barns or fields, turned regularly to prevent spoilage. An acre of wheat or similar grain required approximately 100-200 hours of human labor from planting to harvest, varying by region and soil quality. This intensive process was exacerbated by the war, as able-bodied men were drafted into the military, leaving women, children, elderly, and forced laborers from occupied territories to fill the gaps. The workforce: German farms were modest in size, typically 10-20 acres for family operations, though larger estates existed in eastern Prussia. The Nazi government promoted autarky, self-sufficiency, through programs like the Reich Food Estate, which controlled production and pricing. However, labor shortages became acute as the war progressed. By 1943, over 7 million foreign workers and POWs, mostly from Poland and the Soviet Union, were conscripted into German agriculture, often under brutal conditions. Women played an increasingly vital role, organized through the Reich Women's League, but the system relied heavily on manual effort. Children were pulled from schools during harvest seasons, and even urban dwellers were mobilized for harvest help campaigns. Mechanization. Germany was not entirely backward. It had made strides in mechanization during the interwar period. By 1939, the country boasted around 50,000 tractors, primarily produced by companies like Lanz or Deutz, and some threshing machines were common on larger farms. However, full combine harvesters, machines that integrated cutting, threshing, and cleaning, were rare, expensive luxuries limited to experimental stations or wealthy landowners. Fuel shortages due to Allied bombing and resource allocation to the military further hampered mechanized farming. Most farmers stuck to tools that hadn't evolved much since the 19th century: horse-drawn plows, hand sickles, and wooden carts. The Nazi emphasis on organic farming and rejection of Jewish industrial methods, as per propaganda, also slowed adoption of advanced technology. While Germany led in some areas like synthetic fertilizers, its agricultural mechanization lagged far behind the United States. The result? German agriculture was labor-intensive, inefficient on a per-worker basis, and increasingly unproductive as the war dragged on. Pre-war, Germany imported 20 to 30% of its food. By 1944, rationing was severe. Adults received about 1,500, 2,000 calories daily, leading to widespread malnutrition. The regime plundered occupied Europe for food, but domestic production couldn't keep pace with military demands and civilian needs. This vulnerability was a key factor in Hitler's push for Lebensraum, living space, in the East, to secure agricultural resources. German soldiers and officers, many hailing from rural areas or small towns, were intimately familiar with this system. Farming meant back-breaking toil, seasonal migrations of labor, and constant worry about yields. The concept of fully mechanized agriculture on a massive scale was something they'd read about in reports on American capitalist excess, but never witnessed. To them, it seemed almost fantastical, a product of propaganda rather than reality. The American contrast: machines, scale, and unimaginable abundance. In stark contrast, American agriculture in the 1940s represented the pinnacle of mechanization and efficiency, a testament to the nation's industrial might and vast natural resources. The tractor revolution. By 1940, over 1.5 million tractors were in operation across American farms, according to U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA statistics. These machines, produced by giants like John Deere, International Harvester, and Ford, had largely replaced horses and mules for plowing, planting, cultivating, and hauling. The transition accelerated during the Great Depression through government programs like the New Deal's Rural Electrification Administration, which brought power to farms and enabled electric motors for additional tasks. Farmers who had once relied on animal power for generations were now harnessing mechanical power, freeing up land previously used for feed crops and boosting overall productivity. The combine harvester. The star of this mechanized revolution was the combine harvester, an invention dating back to the 1830s, but refined and mass-produced in the early 20th century. By the 1930s, combines had become standard equipment on wheat farms in the Great Plains, including Nebraska. A typical 1940s combine was a marvel of engineering. 15, 20 feet wide, powered by a gasoline or diesel engine, with rotating reels to cut stalks, conveyor belts to feed them into threshing cylinders, sieves to separate grain from chaff, and blowers for cleaning. The harvested grain was then funneled into bags or bulk bins, all in one continuous operation. One skilled operator on a combine could harvest 50, 100 acres per day depending on field conditions and machine size. This was revolutionary. Work that would require dozens of men with binders, threshers, and wagons for weeks was condensed into hours. The productive capacity. American farms in the 1940s produced staggering surpluses. The United States not only fed its own population of 140 million, but exported massive quantities to allies like Britain and the Soviet Union via Lend-Lease, supplied its global military forces, and maintained civilian rations that were generous compared to Europe's. USDA data shows that an average American farmer in 1943 produced enough food to sustain approximately 15, 20 people beyond his own family, thanks to mechanization, fertile land, and scientific advances like hybrid seeds and fertilizers. In comparison, a German farmer managed only 5, 10, hampered by smaller plots, poorer soil in some regions, and war disruptions. This productivity gap was so vast that German military intelligence had difficulty comprehending it fully. Reports from the Abwehr, German military intelligence, underestimated American output, viewing it through the lens of European constraints. The American system wasn't just about machines. It was supported by infrastructure, electrified farms, extensive rail networks for transport, and government subsidies that encouraged innovation. Wartime production boards prioritized farm equipment, ensuring that even as factories churned out tanks and planes, agriculture remained robust. The POW camps, German soldiers in the American heartland. Beginning in 1942 as Allied forces captured Axis troops in North Africa and later in Europe, the United States became home to over 370,000 German POWs, housed in more than 500 camps across 46 states. Why bring them to America? Several practical reasons drove this decision. Security was paramount. Placing camps in the remote American interior, far from coasts, minimized escape risks and potential sabotage. Logistics played a role. Transporting prisoners across the Atlantic was easier than guarding them near battlefronts. Most crucially, labor shortages gripped the U.S. home front, with millions of American men drafted into service. Farms, factories, and forests needed workers. POWs filled this gap, providing a ready workforce under controlled conditions. The Geneva Convention. The United States adhered strictly to the 1929 Geneva Convention on POW treatment. Prisoners received adequate food, often better than what German civilians got back home, shelter in barracks, medical care, and opportunities for recreation, education, and paid work. Wages were set at 80 cents per day for non-officers, payable in camp scrip for canteen purchases. Abuse was rare. American guards were instructed to treat POWs humanely, fostering a stark contrast to the brutality many Germans had inflicted on their own captives. This treatment itself shocked many POWs. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as savage capitalists who would torture or execute prisoners. Instead, they found clean camps, 3 meals a day, including meat and coffee, luxuries scarce in wartime Germany, and even libraries with German books. As one POW later recalled in a memoir, "We expected hell. We found a strange paradise." The work programs. Under Geneva rules, POW labor couldn't directly aid the war effort but could support the civilian economy. Thus, Germans were assigned to agriculture, logging, canning factories, and road maintenance. By 1944, over 90% of able-bodied POWs were working, earning praise from employers for their discipline and skills. In agricultural states like Nebraska, Texas, and Wisconsin, POWs became integral to harvests. Farmers, desperate due to the draft, welcomed the help. This immersion brought German prisoners face to face with American mechanization, often for the first time. Camp Scottsbluff and the first encounters with American farming. Camp Scottsbluff, located in western Nebraska's Platte River Valley, was one of the largest POW facilities, housing up to 4,000 Germans at its peak. Surrounded by fertile agricultural land, endless fields of wheat, sugar beets, corn, and cattle ranches, the camp was ideally situated for labor programs. POWs arrived via train, often after months in transit camps. They were assigned to work details on local farms, supervised by armed guards but treated more like hired hands. American farmers, many of German descent themselves, sometimes shared meals or conversations, humanizing the enemy. The first reactions. When German POWs first encountered American tractors, large, powerful machines like the John Deere Model A or Alice Chalmers WC, they often assumed they were military vehicles repurposed for the home front. These tractors, with their steel wheels or rubber tires, wide frames, and roaring engines, resembled light tanks without armor. POWs would murmur among themselves or ask guards, "Are these combat vehicles, part of your armored divisions, shown to us as a threat?" The guards, often Midwestern reservists, would chuckle and reply, "No, these are just farm tractors. Every decent-sized farm around here has 1 or 2. My uncle's got 3 on his spread." The Germans struggled to believe it. Equipment this advanced, this robust, had to be reserved for elite units or government projects. In Germany, tractors were status symbols for large estates, not commonplace tools. Then came the combines, escalating the shock to new levels. The combine harvester, terror in the wheat fields. The defining moment for many German POWs was witnessing a combine harvester in full operation during the wheat harvest. The visual impact. A 1940s combine was an imposing sight, towering over a man at 10, 15 feet high, spanning 15, 20 feet wide, with gleaming blades, whirring belts, clanking chains, and a plume of exhaust. It advanced through the field like a mechanical behemoth, devouring swaths of wheat and leaving only stubble behind. To men accustomed to horse-drawn reapers or hand-harvesting crews, this was akin to science fiction, a living machine that seemed almost alive. The productivity. One combine, pulled or self-propelled, could process 50, 100 acres in a day. In Germany, the same acreage might require 50, 100 workers laboring for a week or more using binders to cut and tie bundles, stationary threshers powered by steam or belts, and manual cleaning. The efficiency was mind-boggling. American farms could harvest thousands of acres in days with minimal manpower. POWs, often assigned to follow-up tasks like stacking bags or clearing fields, did the math in their heads. If one American farmer with such technology could outproduce 50 German counterparts, what did that imply for the broader war economy? The reaction? Post-war memoirs and U.S. intelligence debriefs capture the profound impact. One anonymous German officer wrote, "I stood transfixed as the machine consumed the field. In that hour, I knew the war was lost. A nation that equips its peasants with such wonders, what horrors must their factories produce for the battlefield?" A sergeant from Saxony recalled, "We had fought with honor on 3 fronts, but seeing that harvest beast, I understood we were ants challenging giants. Our will was strong, but their machines were invincible." Another lieutenant noted, "At first I thought it a prototype, a showpiece to demoralize us. Then I saw fleets of them across the horizon on neighboring farms. This was their norm. Our propaganda had lied. America was not decaying, it was thriving." These reactions weren't universal. Some die-hard Nazis dismissed it as trickery. But for many, especially those from farming backgrounds, it was a turning point. The psychological impact, shattering Nazi illusions. The combine harvester and other farm machinery had a deep psychological effect on German POWs, dismantling core tenets of Nazi ideology and wartime propaganda. Belief 1: American weakness and decadence. Goebbels' propaganda machine portrayed Americans as soft, materialistic, racially impure, and lacking martial discipline. The US was a nation of shopkeepers and jazz lovers unwilling to sacrifice for victory. But the combines revealed something else. Americans weren't lazy, they were innovative. By automating drudgery, they freed human potential for higher pursuits, including war production. This wasn't decadence, it was superior efficiency. Belief 2: German superiority through will and efficiency. Nazi doctrine emphasized the will to power and Aryan racial superiority, claiming spiritual strength would triumph over material odds. 1 German soldier equals 10 enemies, they boasted. Yet how could will bridge a 50-to-1 productivity chasm? Combine showed that American efficiency dwarfed Germany's, despite the Reich's vaunted organization. Belief 3: Germany as the world's industrial leader. Germany prided itself on engineering prowess, think Messerschmitt jets or V-2 rockets, but POWs realized America's scale was categorically different. Germany innovated under duress. America mass-produced abundance in peacetime. Belief 4: The war was winnable. Hitler's strategy relied on quick victories to force negotiations. Early successes in Europe seemed to validate this, but combines proved America could wage prolonged war, feeding armies while maintaining home front stability. These shattered beliefs led to demoralization. increased cooperation with captors, and even defections to anti-Nazi groups in camps. The conversations. POWs confront reality amid the fields. POW camps buzzed with whispered debates as Germans processed their observations. The officers' debates. Educated officers like Muller analyzed strategically. Are these combines ubiquitous or anomalies? The Americans say every wheat belt farm has one. I've counted dozens. Their output must be tenfold, ours 20-fold. What does this mean for munitions, fuel? Silences followed as the implications sank in. Defeat was economic, not just military. The enlisted men's reaction. Rural soldiers felt it viscerally. This machine could feed my whole village. Why fight when they have plenty? Some denied propaganda stunt, others accepted. We've been misled. The Führer promised victory, but against this. The unspoken question. If farming is this advanced, what of their weapons factories? The military-industrial context, their fears were justified. The POW's deductions were accurate and understated. American war production from 1941 to 1945 was staggering. Over 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 257 major warships, 2,700 Liberty ships, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, to 2.4 million military vehicles. Germany's outputs paled, approximately 100,000 aircraft, approximately 50,000 tanks, limited ships due to naval focus on U-boats. US factories produced military goods while farms sustained everything else. Germany's strained agriculture forced resource diversions, weakening the front. By 1944, when POWs saw combines, Allied invasions confirmed the economic verdict. The letter home that couldn't be sent. POWs attempted to share insights in letters, but censors intercepted defeatist content. One translated example: Dear family, I am treated fairly. The farms here use machines that harvest like armies. One man does what our whole community struggles with. America is not weak as we heard. Pray for peace. Censor note: defeatist, withhold. Such letters informed US intelligence of shifting morale. The sugar beet harvest, another layer of revelation. Post-wheat POWs worked sugar beets, revealing more shocks. In Germany, beets were hand-dug, topped, and hauled laborious. In Nebraska, mechanical lifted unearthed roots, toppers sliced leaves, trucks carried tons. Abundance allowed discarding imperfect beets, unthinkable in rationed Germany. Sugar symbolized luxury. Americans had it in rations, while Germans lacked basics. The psychological warfare aspect, intentional or accidental. Historians debate if exposures were deliberate psyops. Intentional view, intelligence knew of underestimations. Showing abundance demoralized aided interrogations. Evidence debriefs recorded reactions. Accidental view, labor needs primary, impacts secondary. Reality mix, practical but exploited. Camp reports noted, POWs showed doubt after farm work, increasing cooperation. The broader pattern, technology shock beyond the fields. Combines were one shock, others compounded. Supermarkets, outings revealed stocked shelves, meats, fruits, even during rationing, more than German peacetime. Automobiles, families-owned cars, in Germany Volkswagens were promises, not realities. Infrastructure, paved roads, reliable electricity contrasted German blackouts. Consumer goods, stores brimmed with items highlighting wealth. Medical care, camps offered antibiotics, dentistry, better than Wehrmacht field hospitals. Each reinforced America was prosperous, capable. The Wisconsin case, dairy farms and industrial-scale production. In Wisconsin camps, POWs worked dairies. Germany had dairy, but small-scale, hand-milked. Wisconsin, mechanical milkers handled herds, refrigerated tanks stored milk, factories processed cheese. 1 POW. They produce so much milk they export or waste it, incomprehensible excess. The potato harvest, abundance that defied belief. Idaho POWs harvested potatoes mechanically. Diggers, sorters, massive yields. Discarded, substandard potatoes shocked. In Germany, they'd be rations. Volume, fields horizon wide, tons hauled effortlessly. The conversations with American soldiers, the casual truth. Interactions demystified. Guard, your farm back home? POW, 10 acres, family works hard. Guard, mine's 300 acres, Dad and I manage with machines. POW, impossible. Guard's matter-of-factness terrified more than boasts. The intelligence value insights from the demoralized. Yes, debriefs yielded. Propaganda's failures, the underestimation of U.S. capacity. Leadership deceptions. Implications: Germany might fight desperately knowing defeat loomed, accurate for 1945. The post-war impact: POWs return and rebuild post-1945. Repatriated POWs shared experiences influencing West Germany's economic miracle. Narratives: we lost to machines, not cowardice. Motivated industrialization adopting U.S. methods. The irony: agricultural technology as an indirect weapon. Combines enabled feeding draftees' families, Allied aid, manpower for industry. Germany's farms constrained everything. The lessons: what the combine harvester taught the world. Lesson 1: industry wins wars. Lesson 2: misinformation dooms strategies. Lesson 3: civilian tech bolsters military. Lesson 4: propaganda crumbles against reality. Lesson 5: mechanization transforms societies. The human dimension: soldiers grappling with harsh truth. For Muller, the field was an existential blow, faith shattered, worldview upended. Many suffered depression, others philosophized, learning from defeat. They rebuilt Germany, applying lessons. Conclusion: the machine that unveiled the inevitable. In a Nebraska field, a combine revealed America's might, foretelling defeat. Not weapons, but abundance won. Post-war, it inspired Germany's rise. The harvester, farming tool, but to POWs, ultimate terror.